Well, welcome, Brainstorms audience. We're so happy to have you for our September podcast, which is something very near and dear to all of our hearts. All of us who work with our veterans from the global war on terror or the Vietnam War or even Korea, World War II, who have suffered traumatic brain injuries. There's oftentimes that kind of crossover for something called post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. September is National PTSD Awareness Month. So I'm going to be introducing you in a moment to a very good friend of mine who taught me almost everything I know about PTSD and taking care of veterans so that you can take this to your neighborhood. Right now, we are in the neighborhood of beautiful Plain City at our favorite Sycamore Studios with our incredible staff, and we're very happy to have you. We're only here thanks to the goodness of the Fred and June McMurray Foundation. We thank them monthly for the donation they gave us to allow us to reach to you. So today's discussion is going to be kind of a follow-up to the August discussion. In August, we had Dr. Tom Morris, U.S. Air Force physician, former ER physician, who has now developed a program called Innovative Wellness. You know, he talked about how memories, and particularly ones that cause you to be anxious or to be stressed or to lose sleep, can actually affect your physical health. And he showed us how, with his particular techniques, he tries to unlock the subconscious, let the subconscious not only realize what's causing this, but then work through it. And in working through it, also work through to get their body stronger, less affected by those memories. Well, the lady who helps you work through it is a counselor. She has a very important degree that I learned on my own when I started dealing with the VA, and many of you did, I'm sure, too. If you've got MSW behind your name, it means somebody who's going to be a miracle worker for you, and I really do mean that. The Masters of Social Work seems to be in the healthcare professions, and I've been in it a very long time in very many roles. And so I'd like to introduce to you now a good friend of mine, a Master's of Social Work, very important degree, like we said, in healthcare, Maureen Rolfe. Maureen, just kind of tell us just a little bit about yourself and how you got started in this path to treating veterans.
I've trained at the VA in Houston, Texas, and I've worked at 3 VA hospitals on both inpatient mental health and outpatient mental health and behavioral health. And I've co-led a couples group at the Vet Center, which they were originally set up for Vietnam veterans who were uncomfortable going to VA hospitals due to mistrust issues.
Okay, gotcha. And the vet centers, they still exist, right? The vet centers?
I believe so.
Okie dokie. And are there vet centers available, do we know, in rural areas or not? I was told they are, but some of my vets still have trouble trying to find them. But we can look online, I guess, and see.
Yes, the one I worked at was in the city of Cincinnati.
Okay, gotcha. Tell us a little bit about how that experience got started, because I think you were really relatively new in your social work life, weren't you, at the time? So it must have been kind of interesting and different.
Yeah, I started at age 26.
Okay.
And I worked at the VA for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And in all mental health, behavioral health settings. And I also worked on medical floors.
Oh, okay.
Where the role of social work is to thoroughly assess patients, recommend treatment, either inpatient behavioral health or counseling through groups or couples, or linkage with community resources or with extended VA resources, of which there are many.
Oh, yeah, and that takes a lot for particularly a brain that's been battered and has had numerous blast injuries, for instance. First of all, they've not been in the community. Most of our young vets now go right from high school. So, they haven't. But the social worker is the link to getting community support as well as VA support. Is that fair to say?
Correct. Very much so.
Okay. It's very interesting because I've talked on the podcast about being contacted from veterans from over 29 states. And the interesting thing is they all know their social worker. They may not know exactly who. And it was actually my veterans that taught me, if you really need things done or somebody contacted in the community, which is a lot of weight on your shoulders, and you become kind of the one and only link between hospital or outpatient in the community. Is that a fair assessment? Or?
Yes, I would use the word advocate.
Perfect. But you have to advocate to so many different areas to get what, like supplies, or if you're looking for employment training, or that's all things that you provide. But it's time consuming to do that, is it not?
Yes. And there's where the VA does have a lot of resources that a lot of times veterans don't know about.
Yeah. Or remember when you tell them. So could you tell me a little bit of difference, because we're trying to educate and myself, and there's being on the floor, and that's different from being in like an outpatient setting, which is also different from your emergency room setting. So could you tell us just a little bit about those three different roles, and I'll kind of keep going on because our vets end up at all of them.
Yes, so I'll start with there's the medical social worker, which I've done on different pulmonary floors or rehab floors, and that is a lot more of the discharge planning and linkage with community resources.
Okay.
In an ER setting, both at the VA and non-VA, that's the role of the social worker is to do a thorough assessment to decide the treatment plan. Okay. And then refer accordingly. And sometimes that means taking the patient right from the ER up to the behavioral health unit.
Oh, really? Yeah, I'm sure your years of logging down, speaking to probably hundreds of thousands of patients in our careers, we've talked to so many, you get to have a little bit better sense of that for sure. But in the beginning, what was this like for you to go into a VA, more maybe Vietnam veterans at that time? Tell us a little bit about those experiences.
I actually started on the inpatient unit. So, that was a whole new world than where I had come from.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I got to see the pain and the suffering and how the VA worked with patients trying to prepare them for the real world, getting back acclimated. Sometimes that involved medication, sometimes it involved over-medication, and lots of therapy. And that's when I would do individual and group therapy and the couples therapy.
I gotcha. And that was a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, I think.
That was actually harder emotional work than the crisis work in the ER for the assessments, because the average length of stay years ago was 21 days. So I really got to know the veterans, and they frequently came back.
I bet that's true.
Versus, I think now the average length of stay at a VA is 7 to 14 days.
Okay, so they've really cut that down.
Yeah, but it's still more than in the community. The community length of stay is closer to 3 to 7 days.
And that's hardly enough time for you to, really get to know them and hard for them to decompress. I mean, do you think when you say you are the person charged with getting them back in the community, but our Vietnam veterans as well as our global war and terror, they go from high school to war, and in both wars, you're talking about, and we've mentioned this a couple times, we mentioned this with Dr. Tom Morris, you're going to a different time period. You're going to a totally different environment. So if they haven't been here with all of the responsibility, the financial, going to the bank, getting public transportation, all of that's new, and most of us civilians don't recognize that, correctly?
Correct. They also bring a certain survival instinct to the table.
Okay, explain that.
That people that haven't been to the war can't relate to or understand, and that certainly is an asset in surviving in the world.
Oh, well, could you tell me just a little bit about what you have witnessed as the survival instinct?
There isn't... They can handle a lot more, if that makes sense.
Yes, that does.
Because they've been traumatized sometime, obviously not everybody. And so we always talk about that being a negative, but that can also be a positive, that they've survived and made it.
Oh, that is true. I think once when we were talking, I was mentioning, because every 4th of July, you get the thing about, the veterans and the fireworks and all of that. And in truth, what I say to our veterans, I said, when you hear something that sounds like gunfire or like a blast, you go somewhere. You go for safety. that isn't being crazy to me. That's not being crazy. That's an overuse of your fight or flight, overuse of your survival mechanism. But as I told one reporter a couple 4th of Julys ago, I said, nobody who doesn't survive an injury, nobody who passes or dies in a violent incident has PTSD. So by that, it is a survival technique. And what you are then kind of charged to do, what I am with, is to try to tone that down. Is that a fair assessment there?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, so being an advocate, I love that term, and you really are. And you've helped me be a better advocate too, because I have a lot of that fight or flight too. It's like okay, ready, fire, aim. Okay, that kind of thing. So what kind of things did you kind of see that you have young men, women who have that fight or flight naturally anyhow from adolescence? How do you, first of all, bring up to them that this may be going on, and then how they can themselves or their family strategize to tone that down?
Well, my technique is a motivational, insight-oriented therapy.
Oh, I love that.
And so a lot of clients are missing confidence, a connection to someone who cares, encouragement, and support.
Oh,
so
wow,
starting with those basic ideas, we can move from there.
Okay.
And a lot of times veterans feel like they're a burden on someone, that no one understands, no one else has been there.
Yeah.
And that leads to isolation. And I believe that isolation kills and sometimes leads to suicide.
So I really like that phrase. Not that it's a great phrase, but it's a memorable phrase. Isolation kills. And I think that is, when you mentioned that to me for the first time, which was, a couple years ago, it kind of struck me too, because I know when I've been involved in what I call crisis calls, where our Resurrecting Lives Foundation is not a crisis center. So anyway, see that, we are here to kind of help you get better health care, education, and employment. But that doesn't mean that you hang up on a crisis call. Do you know what I mean? You still handle that. And so many of them are calling, they're nowhere near, and they're out in the woods, or they're in their car in a parking lot after hours, or, they're out by themselves. And that, you taught me, Maureen, that heightened sense of awareness on my part needs to be done, because without any connection, the only connection they have, and maybe their last one, is the person they're talking to at the time. Is that correct?
And that is their last-ditch effort to connect.
Oh, and that's a really good thing to mention, because I've had other people say, oh, my buddy called me and I didn't know what to do, so I just kept listening. Perfect. I heard a general once make a statement, I believe that it was at Fort Sam Houston, down in Texas in San Antonio, and he said to the whole 400 people that were there, if you get that call, you are privileged. You are privileged to be the person called. Do not think you don't know what to do. Do not immediately hang up and pass on. Keep speaking with them. Keep talking to them. And he was the one who taught me that if I get one of those calls, I stay on the line. If we pass off to 988 or the VA hotline, I stay there to make sure that there is somebody. Because if you feel, and they feel isolated because they feel they're not doing good for people. I mean, that's what a veteran is all about, service, right?
And often someone comes into the ER as a result of one of those suicide calls.
Oh, okay.
That person has left them on the line until someone comes and brings them to the emergency room.
And when they come to your emergency room and say you see them, so you're then maybe an hour or a little bit more after the initial call, but you keep it going. I mean, it's like, okay, you talk to this person, now these people picked you up, and now here's somebody in the ER who's going to help. Is that?
Yes, they're still very much in crisis.
That's what I would think.
Yeah, and so that the social worker is the person that is their connection to someone that cares, that's encouraging, that's listening to them, and hopefully building their confidence and making an assessment on what the next treatment plan would be.
I think that when we've talked about the difference in some of every war has a different technology associated with killing, so different wounds of war, but this particular war, global wear and tear, and right now we can't disagree that the entire planet is not in chaos. I mean, if you're not having the stress of drones dropping bombs or what's going on there, you've got fires, you've got floods, you've got, I'm really old, and this is really a lot of chaos that we're seeing. That stays with you too. And I think that so many people that are thinking, well, my problem isn't as bad as, for instance, the flooding, the fires, the people who are just, I shouldn't be feeling bad or I shouldn't be complaining. And that's where they kind of lose confidence. No, you actually served, you volunteered your life for somebody. So how do you build back up that confidence? Because, one of the things that we say is that just saying, oh, I love veterans, thank you for your service. That's not quite enough.
Correct.
You got to show them, thank them for their service. What do you suggest even to family members or friends?
Caregiver support groups are a great option.
Okay, all righty.
My experience is they're reluctant to participate in them. I've run some of those also.
Okay.
For whatever reason, I think that it's admitting some fault or something or it's not my problem, it's my son's problem or whatever. Right. But that's a great suggestion. I think that the VA, from when I worked there years ago, I think they've continued to improve their services.
Yeah, it appears right. I agree with you.
And I think medicines are used less now, and I think that that's better talk therapy and the group therapies and those connections with resources is an improvement.
And that's pretty much what you and Dr. Morse do now at his, kind of wellness company, Innovative Wellness. And what he was explaining to our audience in last month's podcast was that he's kind of the first line and you're the second line. And in the first line, what his job is to use some of his very basic, he called them basic energy techniques. I've had them, a lot of people that I know have, they're not basic. They're actually pretty advanced, but you're laying on a table and you're thinking different things and he's helping you think through it. And that part is really amazing. So do you have, after he kind of brings the issues to the surface, then you take over from there? Could you give me an example of somebody that you all have?
Yes, our focus is on brain health, as you said. And sometime I see the client first for talk therapy, and certain issues or traumas will be surfaced with me, and then they'll go and do the energy work, and we work in combination. Okay. Sometime the energy work starts first.
I got you.
And then that brings ideas for them to talk about in the talk therapy.
Okay. When you say talk therapy, can you tell me what that entails?
Counseling therapy.
Counseling therapy.
Yeah, that motivational, insight-oriented therapy.
But I think that phrase is so important. And I've always appreciated the words that you choose, to be perfectly honest with you. As I've always had struggle, and I've had struggle with the post-traumatic stress disorder. We know that even in the civilian world, 5 to 7% of people who see a traumatic event or witness one or live through one will have those tendencies. The others up to 30% may have them for 30 days or a little bit longer. But how do you work through someone who has had, for instance, you are now seeing veterans and other people who've had these traumas in their life for 10 years. How do you work through that idea of brain health and motivational therapy? That's a whole lot different than somebody saying, in the old days, we say, oh, we're going to send you to psych. I think that's a big difference. Could you tell me, because you choose your words very specifically and believe in the words you choose.
In the heat of a crisis, it's still some time the first reign of treatment will be to go to psych.
Right.
That kind of gets the ball rolling.
Gotcha. Okay.
Then linkage with good outpatient mental health is the next step. Yeah. And that's sometimes hard to find in the community. The veterans are lucky that they have that available to them. And it's now available to anybody that served. Years ago, you had to be service connected to get mental health or
And by service-connected
treatment.
for our audience, you mean?
Service-connected means that the VA recognizes that you have some sort of disability due to an injury, in either emotional or physical, while you were in the military.
I gotcha. So now, if you've served in whatever capacity, because you and I have talked about the fact that sometimes very traumatic incidents happen in boot camp,
Right.
or in training. I mean, you get blasted. There's no one, I don't believe there's anyone, now maybe, who can jump out of a plane in the airborne units and learn how to parachute and land so softly. I don't believe anybody can keep doing that without suffering some kind of a brain tussle that may set a stage. Would you?
I agree,
Okay.
yeah. And that sometimes they call it a TBI, traumatic brain injury, and
Right.
sometimes it's the post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right. And we do know the two go hand in hand. And I've said this before, and I hope that I'm proved right somewhere down the line, but Dr. Bazarian is one of the main researchers on traumatic brain injury and PTSD, and his belief is that you needed to have had in your life sometime a traumatic brain injury, or something was disconnected in your brain that leads to that reverberation of the same exact incident being played over and over again, which is why some people develop it and other people do not. I would have never entertained that theory, but as you know, I mean, I had a klutzy, stupid fall, head to hit the wall. Nothing traumatic happened there. I was putting up Christmas decorations, and yet the post-traumatic stress disorder that I developed to large crowds, to driving, to things like that, all came from either that incident or an unlocking of something I didn't know were there. So I really love the fact that you know so much about concussion or traumatic brain injury. There is no such thing as a mild one. And how do you approach your patients, your clients who come see you, and they're talking about this event that kind of started things, and the event is very violent, and you think, they were, punched or dragged or something, that can have some repercussions. How do you approach that with them, and what is their response?
A lot of times they haven't talked about it to anybody. That was very well known during the Vietnam era.
Oh, yeah.
And so sometime I'm seeing someone that had been out of the war for 10 years and they were bringing up issues for the first time. So imagine how that just built and built inside of them and what kind of medical issues they might have had as a result of that, ulcers and, high blood pressure.
Exactly. Autoimmune diseases, your body attacking your body, yeah.
And so having that people talk about it, it does work. Mm-hmm. And it sounds simple, and it's not necessarily simple, but it's a start.
Right. No, that's really very good. There is a mother of a veteran with that says she wished they would give T-shirts that said, "I look great, but I have a TBI," or because oftentimes these are, the physically most fit people in our nation usually, particularly the young folks going to war, the physically fit, and they look great, but then they'll do an action like at a restaurant where, like maybe a whole bunch of loud people come in or somebody will drop something and they tend to quote unquote what the civilian world around them thinks is an overreaction rather than muscle memory when you hear that sound. So I don't know. I'm hoping that maybe you have some ideas of what we can tell folks about that.
Well, recognition is certainly a first start, but I think it's also important not to over-identify with your diagnosis because you're not a TBI. You're not a post-traumatic stress disorder victim. I think that that's also part of treatment is realizing that you're more than that.
Mm-hmm. I gotcha. I want to say something that you brought up that I thought was so pertinent, and I feel the same way. So neither you or I are veterans. My father served in World War II. My grandfather in World War I. Never heard a word. Never heard a word about it, that sort of thing. And I know that there are people, particularly, it had seemed to me when I was, kind of doing my traumatic brain injury screening at the VA, a lot of people said, well, you can't talk to a vet unless you're a vet, I have never had a problem that I know of. I have a lot more people talking to me than I even know. What about you? What do you think?
Yes, I believe that I've debunked that theory.
Oh, good.
By being, when I worked at the VA, young single female who was able to crack through that. And I think that sometimes that was used as an excuse not to engage.
Oh, okay.
I found that
that's a very good point.
I found that the veterans, and we could say patients and clients in general, who come with that approach are looking for a way not to connect. There's our word connection again.
Yes.
And are resistant to treatment and help or afraid of change.
Yeah, I think so. I think, too, there is an authenticity about you. I mean, you really listen. In our society right now, we're not really used to those kind of conversations, and the younger generation don't even talk. They text. It's really true. So I think that that's something, if somebody calls you and they are very upset and you assume they're right, listening can be so very important to try to figure out what can help pull them out. And I never end without saying, I used to say, what can I do for you on this? Oh, my goodness, my Vietnam vets came down on me. My favorite line was, I said, who do you think you are, Joan of Arc? And I thought, no, I didn't, but give me a little bit more. And he said, they know what they've been through. You're just hearing it for the first time. Why do you think that you can just all of a sudden, without listening to the whole story, bring that? He says, you don't ask them what to do for them. You give them something to do for you, because that's what they want. When you talk about that isolation, it's when they have decided, that lack of confidence, that they are no longer able to render the amount of service that they are used to rendering or that they want to render.
Yeah, they were important. What they did mattered. It then to sometime come home and not feel that same sense of importance and belonging, that's the beginning of some of the problems.
I think that's really true. We had one of our veterans who was in charge of $20 billion worth of equipment and 100 men, and he had a blast injury being on a turret. Okay, and it was, quote unquote, mild traumatic brain injury that rendered him speechless and, difficulties walking. A lot of things that kind of indicated more than mild. That being stated, when he was able to be treated and then came back about 6 months later, he was offered a job, and it was a janitorial job cleaning the toilets in a certain community hospital. Now, I'm not saying that he was ready for $20 billion worth of equipment, 100 people, but if they had listened to his story maybe a little bit more, they see that this was a very young man who raised through the ranks very quickly and had an enormous responsibility, and maybe getting an idea of listen first, what would you like to do? Where do you think your skills are? Can we get you in a training program or to an employer that's willing to work with you to do that? You guys kind of go into that. When you're talking to somebody, do you ever ask them what it is that makes you feel better? I often ask them, what did everybody in high school think you were going to do? Or what was your goal in high school? And you'll get some wacky goals, but I want to be a coach, or that's not a wacky goal. That's a doable thing that we can work at.
Similarly, I have done with clients, I've asked them, what would you imagine that it's your funeral and people are there talking about you. What are they saying?
Yeah.
And then secondarily, what would you like them to be saying about you? You can learn a lot about what's important in their values that way.
Oh, that's really very helpful. But again, it's back to the listening. Mm-hmm. I know we did the first documentary that we did thanks to Patton Productions and Ben Patton, the World War II General Patton's grandson and the Vietnam veteran Major General, I believe, was his dad. And he said, my dad always told me you were given 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that ratio. And I never forgot that. I said, okay, I've got to listen twice as long as I speak. And I think that's really helpful, too. So would you have like an instance of somebody that came into Innovative Wellness and saw you and saw Tom and what you both kind of did and how you keep supporting them throughout this process of it?
Yes, there was a man who was the youngest of several boys in a family.
Oh, wow.
And he was bullied by the boys. They had a family business, and he was always thought to feel inept. So when he did branch out into his own successful business, he found himself bullying his employees.
Without even knowing.
Yeah, treating them in a way that, you know, they would quit on him, and he wasn't getting the response that he wanted. And so in combination with the energy work and the talk therapy, we were able to kind of dig up some of those feelings that he had as a child that were carried over into his adult life. And he has learned that he gets more from his employees when he doesn't do that. Yeah. He's learned to just calm down and think before talking.
Yeah, and that was definitely it must have been a major epiphany for him.
Yes.
You know, which first of all, it's very laudable that he wanted to find out what it was, you know, that he could do. And I do think, and Dr. Tom talked about that when he was here, that our patterns of dealing with almost everything started, he was talking about, 2, 3, 4 years old, and suddenly you begin to develop your own kind of response to things that you find either offensive or could be harmful to you. And they become so much a part of you, you don't even notice them after.
And this client kept getting feedback from his wife and from employees that, we don't like working with you. We don't like the way you come home at night at the end of the workday. And he really reports now that he feels so much calmer and able to communicate better with people and get the respect that he wants and needs from them, and vice versa.
Yeah. And I can't even imagine that's really low man on a totem pole if you're the youngest of that many boys. and they're all kind of type. That's a tough place to be, for sure. That's very good. We were talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. We know that there's a much greater incidence of unemployment and homelessness and the final kind of consequence of untreated or unrecognized PTSD or TBI, and that being suicide. And we know that in Thomas Joyner's book, Why People Commit Suicide, Why People Die by Suicide, I believe is the correct terms to use. It was that they have a means for doing it, and we certainly know our military does, that they have a desire to be gone. But the main one, the third one, was why they have that desire, because they feel like they're a burden. And I think that you and Dr. Tom at your clinic, and I think the VA has gotten so much better with that as well, as has healthcare in the civilian world as well, because we weren't all that great about it before, is that this is a real person with a real issue here. We don't need to medicate them. We don't need to just dismiss them, but we need to help them realize that and then how to deal with that.
I agree.
Yeah. So you are big on connection. You kind of say it in the Jamaican way, connection. Is that?
Yes.
And I always think of Marley when I hear that, but it is really true. If you have even one person, I've heard so many talks say, even one person who believes in you, it's a world of difference from thinking no one does.
And another study has shown that patients or clients or people that have come very close to completing suicide, when at the very last minute they really don't want to. People that have survived suicide
really
have said that is the case.
Oh, wow.
So that's
again, if you get that call, keep them on the phone. If you're close by, go there, do something.
And the stigmatism of getting mental health treatment now is been minimized versus 30 years ago.
Oh,
it was
absolutely.
considered a fault or a negative thing to want help.
And with the kind of rise of all of these different apps and social media and that, the amount of people who are feeling angst from all of that, I think, has elevated the conversation because there's so many more people. I mean, what we're talking about right now are things that help the adolescents as well. And you and I were talking about the actual physiologic studies that have been done showing that if you are in combat, if you are somebody who comes in right after high school and you go into combat, all of the chemicals from combat, the adrenaline, the cortisol release, all of that, the testosterone release, male and female, that testosterone release keeps you to be ready in a combative situation, but also keeps you in a state of adolescence, maybe 2, 3, 4 years later. And you noticed that with your young patients too, didn't you?
When I was working inpatient unit at the VA in Cincinnati, at that time, the Vietnam veterans were 39 years old, and they seemed like they were 18.
Yeah.
There was like a stuck in adolescence I observed.
And what they have shown now since, I really feel for the Vietnam vets because we didn't have a way to look into the brain, and that's why they developed all of those mental health terms. And yes, I mean, there is a thing, but one of these days, all of those will be associated with a brain, a chemical, a place where, the chemicals react. What they have shown is all of those really keep the brain connections from maturing. And so that frontal lobe where we get all of that wisdom, executive function, the what is right, what is wrong, how to override it, doesn't get to connect because they're stuck in that midbrain, fight, flight, get ready, survive. It really does keep them there. But I thought that was a very interesting observation for somebody who was as young as you were to make that. And then it was proven scientifically like 30 or 40 years later. But I think that is something to keep in mind. Since now only 1% of our nation is protecting us in the military, I think we in the civilian world have to be, we need to join their world. It's not up to them to know everything about us, but we certainly as a group can know what we can do to assist them. And one of the things is you don't wait to be asked, right? Do you ever give any strategy to like family members, things that they can do to help calm down a situation or help bring the person down to a more normal state?
Well, I think that the military now is doing a better job of debriefing and keeping the families informed of that versus years ago, come home, don't talk about it, come home with muddy boots on and watch Happy Days, So I think overall education and encouragement and, like the 4 things I say with therapy is, connection with someone that cares, encouragement, support, and building confidence.
I think all of that is great. And I love the fact that we had Dr. Tom in August or having you in September to kind of, beginning to end these small pockets, we call it, of innovative people who are saying, we're not going to be over-medicating, we're not going to be shocking, we're not going to do that, right? Now we're going to have the body and brain start working together again.
Focus on brain health.
Yeah. I think that is really helpful. So you made a decision not only to go into social work, but also I know the University of Houston. We talked about that. My nieces went there. That's a big move at the time that you were to go from Ohio. Nobody left Ohio. I was in Ohio. I'm still in Ohio. Do you know what I mean? Like nobody left Ohio at that time. That was a very big move of you to get a lot of experience in a very well-known place.
Yeah, and I was so lucky to get introduced to the VA and to the field of behavioral health, mental health. That was something I didn't know anything about.
And now you're carrying that out in the private sector, which is really very helpful. And I hope that sometime in the near future, we may be able to get a pilot study of, yours and Dr. Tom's kind of therapy mode, because I know he's helped just so many people. And I know when I get super stressed, you guys help me too. So I can't
the combination of that energy work with talk therapy is a perfect match.
Okay. Well, we kind of end our podcast. Is there anything you want to say before we get your ending quote and we talk about that?
No, I think that behavioral health, mental health, psychiatry, whatever the term for today has advanced, and it is more welcomed into society now.
Right. As a matter of fact, there are some places, like when you go to the West Coast, if you don't have a diagnosis, then they like that diagnosis,
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. So what quote would you want to share with our audience today that may have shaped your life?
Well, I believe that from the Bible, there was always the quote where Jesus would say, "When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me drink? When I was naked, did you clothe me?" And I thought, I want to be able to say yes. So whatever you do for the least of my brothers, that you do for me, that was my inspiration to go into the helping field.
And you certainly have helped a lot. And I mean, not only have you helped them, but you've helped the helpers. I was going to, I don't usually end with a quote myself, but because we know each other, we've worked together for so long, I was kind of inspired to do this because I did see Maureen last evening at our neighborhood book club. And the neighborhood book club has been so supportive of our Veterans Initiative, of our Resurrecting Lives Foundation, even to the point of reading books like The Frontline Generation from Marjorie Eastman to get to know about what the global war on terror is doing. And we've been supported, time, talent, treasure from all of you. And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you as the representative for our neighborhood book club to bring out one of my favorite quotes. And that is from Margaret Mead. It's actually the quote that got me started in this direction. And that is, "Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." So as a salute to my neighborhood book club, I want anybody who is in a neighborhood that may have a book club, may have a gathering, may have a cul-de-sac party or something, to really get to know your neighbors. Get that connection that Maureen is talking about, because you may really be the one person that somebody will go to at a time to make a big difference, and you never know when I had my very stupid brain injury, when you become the person who requires the assistance as well. So remember that we are small, but we are mighty, and we are going to change the perception, the diagnosis, and the treatment of traumatic brain injury. Thank you so much. See you next time.
If you are thinking about harming yourself or attempting suicide, tell someone who can help right away. Call 911 for emergency services. Go to the nearest hospital emergency room. Call or text 988 to connect with the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. This podcast is made possible thanks to a grant from the Fred and June McMurray Foundation, and it's produced by the Resurrecting Lives Foundation at the Sycamore Studio. Music is written, performed, and graciously provided by Tim Beckley. Remember, when you work toward brain injury recovery, it is best to journey with a friend and keep your gait steady and your spirit strong. Finally, always seek shelter from your storm.
Baghdad, the Basra, the Boston, the Bakersfield, the hottest battle I ever fought is raging inside of me. My brain has been battered, scrambled and rattled, and no one knows what's going on.